Just catching up with Aidan O'Brien here tonight at training, the Wexford senior manager. Aidan, how are things?
Yeah, things are going reasonably well. Obviously the weather recently hasn't been most helpful, but lucky enough now tonight it's reasonably dry, so Patrick's Park is in good shape given all the weather we've had, so we're happy enough to get a session on it. Yeah.
Well, that's a good start. Aidan, you've a year under your belt now as manager of the team, having taken over from Jason Ryan previously. So how are you finding the role?
Yeah, obviously last year was pretty tough going. You know, you're sort of learning on the job, I suppose. No matter how much experience you have previously at club level or at schools or anywhere else, senior intercounty is really a very full-on experience. And I suppose, being the first year, we were anxious to keep on board all the players that were there previously. So we were anxious to hold that squad together until we found our feet. There was also a question of, I suppose, you know, all the various ancillaries that go with the job, just trying to keep on top of those. So I suppose we were, as I said at the beginning, learning a little bit on the job in relation to all of that type of stuff. This year, at least, we know in advance the various bits and pieces that have to be taken care of outside of the football altogether, so that you can, you know, be prepared for that and get that out of the way, as it were, much earlier this year than may have been the case last year.
Yeah, just taking on in the modern game, like even if it's a club team that you're taking on, it's an awful lot of responsibility. It's an awful lot of commitment and an awful lot of time. What drove you personally to the challenge of the Wexford senior team last year?
Well, I suppose there's something of a natural progression if you've been involved in coaching and you've been involved with teams at club level, and as I said earlier, at schools level, at underage level. I'd been involved with the county under-21s, minors. When the opportunity came along, it's one of those things that obviously you recognise at the time is going to be a huge imposition in your life, a huge challenge in many respects, but at the same time I think the clincher for me was that sense of not having regrets about things that you didn't do. It's one thing to have regrets about things that you tried and did, but to have regrets about things that you didn't do, they say, are regrets you never should have, and that was it.
Well, Wexford have started off this year very strong, opening up their league campaign last weekend with a fine victory over Offaly. I know it's very early in the season, and I know that you're rebuilding, you know, with a lot of new names on the panel, but is there any chance we can get a sneak into the goals of this team for this year?
Well, look, I don't think it would be a huge mystery for anybody, you know, in Wexford to come up with what our goals are likely to be. Obviously, you know, the opening two league games, which happened in quick succession last weekend and this weekend coming, they would have been the immediate focus. The short-term goal would be to get wins in both those games. I mean, you know, we're halfway there in that respect, having beaten Offaly, but we recognise still that the game against Roscommon is going to be a much bigger ask, a much tougher challenge. Then beyond that, obviously, there are goals in relation to the league generally. You know, obviously we would be hoping to hit promotion, get back up to Division 2. That would be a fantastic achievement, I think, with this younger squad. And then beyond that, obviously, the championship goals, we'll keep them to ourselves for now.
There's been a few retirements from the panel from last year, and I think it's only fair to mention three great people that have worn the jersey in David Murphy, Red Barry and Colin Morris. All three have given an enormous contribution. How has the panel reacted to this or responded to this?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting study almost as to the effect that their retirement has had, in the sense that I think there were some players who probably viewed it as an opportunity, players who maybe have been on the panel for a year or two and maybe had served some time on the bench, and you know, maybe not regular first team players. I would say they saw it as a real opportunity and maybe gave them something, encouraged them to really push forward with a view to nailing down a full-time or a permanent or regular place for themselves. I would say there were some players who questioned what this all meant in terms of where things were going to go with such experience leaving the setup. Did it mean that this was the end of the road for a particular group and so on? And I think that they have been reassured really by nothing I have done, but by seeing for themselves the attitude, the enthusiasm and the quality of the younger players who have come in. I think that has been absolutely critical, and I think that those guys who have come in have really won the respect of and inspired in some way some of the more senior players to believe that there is indeed life after such stalwarts as Red and David. And while Colm, I should point out, has not retired, he's not in our squad at the moment, and I'm sure Colm is just, you know, weighing up his options and seeing how things go for him personally in this new year and when the league starts at club level and so on, you know. But I certainly am not going to retire Colm before he decides to do that himself. Just to clarify that. Sorry, Colm.
Just basically, you were mentioning there about the new talent. You know, the conveyor belt of talent in Wexford, are you happy with the way that it's been developed within Wexford as a whole? Or if you had a chance to improve that or make any recommendations or changes, what would you suggest?
Okay. Well, I think that it is a question that needs to be addressed very seriously, because I think that there probably isn't a sufficient consistent thread running through everything that happens from adult senior level right back down to the under 14 development squads and beyond. You know, I would say, I was only speaking to a guy doing a PhD in this whole area very recently about that particular issue, not specifically in Wexford, but generally. There are some counties where you feel that they have an overriding principle that governs what happens with every team from adult right down to juvenile. I think maybe here the culture, the ethos, or the particular style of a team is possibly governed more by the person in charge of that team than by a Wexford style, you know. And I mean, I think that we probably would be well advised to develop a style of play that suits us, that suits our mentality, our players, and to develop that and have that trickle right down through all teams. And therefore, when those younger players come forward into more adult setups, it's not a new style, a new system that they're trying to adopt to. So I think there's that, but I also think it feeds out into other areas, the physical development of young players and so on. I think that there should be a county-wide understanding, agreement, a programme put in place so that that whole area of physical development of young players is addressed, so that it's not piecemeal, that there is a consistency throughout, right back to under 16, through minor, under 21 and so on, so that the conditioning that these players are undertaking is progressive. It's not done as sort of a block with under 16s and then just ditched and then something completely different done when they get to minor, and then but that it's whatever they're doing at 16 is done with a view to helping them reach a particular point when they're 21, 22 years of age.
I suppose you've had first-hand experience being so involved with the schools teams, like, and how this feeds into like county setups and players from different areas get an opportunity, you know, from the weaker club. Like, do you think that the schools can contribute more to the development of our players?
Well, I do think schools competition is very important, and I think that the schools are hugely important to the GAA, just as rugby schools are to the IRFU, in the sense that the competition at schools level is effectively, you know, at inter-county standard at the top end. You know, I mean, most teams at the highest level in the hurling, colleges hurling, or indeed the colleges football, would be capable of competing at inter-county minor level. I think the schools have a rare opportunity because you have those boys all together, you have access to them without them having to travel from various points, you know, when they're in school for PE programs or after school training or that kind of stuff. But I think the schools need to be respected in that the colleges' competitions need to be given the opportunity the schools need to be given the opportunity to compete for those competitions, or in those competitions, without the players concerned being pulled into a whole variety of other areas at the same time. Obviously, the good college player is probably with his county minor squad. He's possibly playing in some club competition at the same time. In our school, for example, many of them are dual players, of course. They're playing both hurling and football. And the same is true in St. Peter's. I mean, Wexford schools like ourselves and Peter's are somewhat unique in that I think the only two schools, there may be one in Dublin, actually, Coláiste Owen, they're the only schools who are competing in both senior hurling and senior football. So it's a big demand on those fellas.
You brought up an interesting topic there that always comes up every year, which is the dual player. You know, and I posed the same question, I suppose, to the hurling manager. Like, it did affect Wexford last year, but from your own personal thinking and leaving players aside from it, do you think that there is a place for the dual player in the modern games with the demands that are on everybody?
Yeah, I think it can be done, and it depends on the particular individual in terms of, I think it depends on his own personal circumstances in terms of his work, his lifestyle, whether he's in college, whether he's married with children, whether he's working locally or working at a long distance. Those kind of things have to be factored into it. But if the player himself feels that he's in a position to commit to both and to play both, I then think the responsibility lies with management, myself, or whoever's over, you know, the various teams to make it work. The guiding principle I would always apply would be that if there's a guy playing both, then the volume of work, the volume of training and so on that he would do shouldn't be any greater than if he were only playing one. But that obviously he would have to divide his time between playing both of them. Now, it may not work out for the player in that as a consequence of dividing his efforts into two games, he may suffer, in that he may not succeed as well in either one. But there are some players who can make it happen. And I also think, and I mentioned this somewhere recently in another interview, that that idea of the dual player is something that's somewhat unique almost to the GAA, and there's a certain Corinthian spirit attached to the dual player, and I think people sort of latch on to that, and there's something exciting about it.
Yeah. Just looking at the league, and I suppose one of the rule changes was the famous black card. Have you any thoughts or comments on it? Or maybe even any thoughts of moving towards the sin bin, since you have girls who play ladies football, perhaps?
Yeah, well, look, obviously I'm not one of these people who immediately gets defensive about a rule change. If it is thought through properly and is felt to be good for the game, then I'm all for it. Now, we've already played the Byrne Cup, we've had the opening round of the National League, and I think all the potential controversy around the black card, so far it has come in very quietly. There hasn't been any great issue. The few of the games that we have played has seen the odd black card issued. We got one over the course of the 4 competitive games we've played to date. There really hasn't been any issue. Now, obviously, I think any rule is only going to be properly tested when the stakes are at their highest. Mm-hmm. In other words, championship, finals, semi-finals, all of that sort of stuff. If there's that's where players will have to, make a decision whether taking the black card for the team, as it were, is worth the cost. So I would say at the moment, the rule change in relation to the black card, there isn't any big deal about it. The jury is probably out a little bit still.
Yeah, I suppose it does give managers and coaches though an opportunity to reintroduce, the tackle properly, so that there aren't as much an issue in the black cards. So it's kind of handing the banter back to the management team to try and sort it out in the training sessions.
Well, obviously, in relation to the black card, we would have had inter-county referees come in and speak to the players. We would have given the players handouts on it. We would have indicated to them areas or websites that they should be looking up in order to educate themselves about it. But it's not rocket science. It's pretty clear-cut, and there are very clear fouls for which the black card will be given. So it's not that it's any huge adjustment in that regard. In terms of educating players on the tackle and so on, look, at the tackle is something we spend a lot of time trying to get right. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that feed into being a good tackler, you know, from your balance to, you know, your position to your courage to, you know, strength, all of those things. But it's an important area, that's for sure.
Yeah. They say the strength of any team is in the panel that surrounds the starting 15. So looking at your backroom team, who are they and what do they bring to you?
Backroom team, look, I feel very lucky to have the people involved that we do have involved. In terms of who they are, our selectors and coaches are Turlough Lacey, Paul McLaughlin, Lee O'Brien. Then we have Dara Kassan, who looks after statistics and other logistical stuff like the communications with the players and so on. Wally Byrne is our kit man, and he probably has the biggest job of the lot of us, and he does it so well. We're just so lucky to have him with us still. Then beyond that, we have our physios, we have our strength and conditioning coach, Jason Moran, our physios being Ronan Cross and Kate Sheridan. And yeah, we have a few other people who help us out from time to time as well, but those are our key personnel, yeah, and just blessed to have them.
Yeah, yeah. Looking back to the club scene last year within Wexford, it was a historic first victory for St Martin's when they defeated Fethard in the final, with both Shelmaliers and Sarsfields completing an interesting mix in the top four. Would you dare to cast a thought towards this year's championship?
Well, just in relation to last year, I was reflecting that in the 27 years that I've been in Wexford, of the 4 teams who were in the semi-finals last year, I think only one of them had won a county final in that time that I'd been in Wexford, and that being Fethard. And I happened to place them in the final for Guseraun that time. In terms of the year ahead, look, I am not going to offend anyone or take that risk by nominating anyone to win it, only to say the very best of luck to all teams involved, and I'm sure it'll be an interesting championship. And I think in the light of last year's you know, semi-finalists and so on, there are quite a few teams who will feel that this has become very open and they all have a real chance. You know, there are 1 or 2 teams that I feel might sneak into contention this year, yeah, who maybe didn't make the semi-finals last year.
Yeah, yeah. Just on the lighter side then, Aidan, just, you know, what's your favourite colour?
My favourite colour, black.
Other interesting things you like to do?
Well, look at my namesake Aidan O'Brien is probably one of the leading figures in the world of horse racing, and horse racing, funny enough, is my favourite sport above all others. And I would feel if I ever made it onto Mastermind that it would be some specific area in the field of horse racing that I'd be answering questions on.
Okay, and 3 people you would like to invite to dinner?
Right. You should have given me advance warning on that one. Let me think. Lester Pickett, definitely, because he certainly wouldn't be saying very much, but he is just such a legend. I would also probably like to invite maybe Jose Mourinho. He might liven things up a little, and he'd have some interesting thoughts and perspectives on things. And although actually I might replace him, a manager I really like and admire is Arsene Wenger. And even though I'm not a particular fan of any soccer club, I really like Arsene Wenger, and I always wish Arsenal the best because of him. So I wouldn't mind having him there. I'm kicking Jose out. I don't know how that'll go down. And my final, I better go for some gender equity here. And sure, Leona, if you weren't available yourself, I'd have to go beyond that and see if I could get someone perhaps like Katie Taylor maybe to come along. Yeah.
Very good, very good. Just before we wrap up here, just have you any messages for any young players who are out there, you know, with aspirations someday to wear the Wexford jersey?
Yeah, well, look, I would say that if you really want to wear the Wexford jersey, if you really want to play at the top in any sport, you know, it's all about hard work. There isn't any shortcut to success. You know, it's curious that the players who do get to the top of their professions, it's just like kids in the Leaving Cert. You know, when the guys come out with 580 and 600 points, people say, sure, they're so intelligent, have such brains, but curiously, they're still the same fellows who do all the hard work and who put in the most time at it. Likewise in sport, you know, it's well recognised that talent is something that can only be realised through sheer hard work. Now, I know myself, being a very average player who couldn't even get on my school team when I was in first year on the school under 14 team, and there were only 50 of us in the whole year, you know, if you stick at it and keep pushing through, you can make it. Now, I didn't make it to any substantive level, but I did manage to play for my county at senior level, and even though we weren't very good, I still cherish the fact that I did play for my county.
Look, just want to thank you for your time, and I want to wish you the very best for 2014, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you later on in the year and see how things are going. That's
great, and thank you for giving us the kind of PR that you're doing through the social media and so on, you know, because the GAA, we have to compete obviously for our audience, and you know, it's great that we can communicate like this.